Welcome back to the Black Print. This is Tiffany, and I'm going to go ahead and continue on where we left off with the book called Indian Alchemy or Rasayana in the Light of Asceticism and Geriatrics by Medahassan. Yeah. So we stopped off at the introduction, so let's continue. In a preface, the author is privileged to relate that part of his autobiography which pertains to the book. The subject made a strong appeal to me insofar as a chemist should know the early history of his science, which is alchemy. I have therefore not spared any energy collecting authentic views, contacting contemporary alchemists, who were only a few as surviving authorities, and critically deducing conclusions, finally all presented in this monograph. On the whole, I feel it is as good as an account as I can offer at the moment. But the tragedy of what is good is that there can be something better. I myself could have improved upon what is offered here if I had access to the selected literature I had accumulated during several years. Among them were reprints of valuable articles, correspondence, and publications of 3 authorities to whom I am indebted for much information as also for encouragement. There are Professor J. Needham of Cambridge, Professor W. Pedgel of London, and Professor Kashkar of Pune. All this literature was at Pune, Bangladesh, but my residence was looted. Excuse me. I had therefore to start my work afresh, and I am aware it is neither the last word on the subject nor the last but one. Professor Guadbird has kindly presented me a copy of his valuable book, Astrology and Alchemy, as 2 fossil sciences. Biologists, however, feel justified in some cases to use the paradoxical term living fossil. I am presenting alchemy here as a living fossil of culture, and I feel this alone suffices to justify my thesis. The one point where I radically differ with most authorities is the basic idea on which alchemy is founded. The entire play of alchemy depends upon the ideal of soul. In this connection, I have tried to follow animism, dualism, and monism, as would be interpreted by their orthodox adherents. Others have tried to rationalize what by nature is incapable of such an approach. For instance, soul is a sort of code word for what essentially differentiates the living and the dead. The Chinese use the word qi for it. In the pages that follow, soul is looked upon as the power which is all becoming, all changing, and above all, enabling things to grow and reproduce. For the purpose of history of alchemy, this definition fully suffices. Creation proceeded from a primordial soul, and the universe was its incarnation. The alchemists, Islamic and European, conceived it as primordial substance, prime matter. The cosmic soul and prime matter are 2 phases of the same entity. One is reminded here of Oswald, who pronounced that matter is what we know and energy is what we think. Today we admit matter can change into energy and vice versa. Accordingly, qi, or soul, is what the ancients believed the entity to be, the prime matter, what the alchemists tried to know as the source of existence. Our popular notion of creation starts with 2 entities. The Word of God contacting a cloud of earth which begins to grow and shape itself as though the clod had become an embryo. The alchemists tried to rehearse creation with two corresponding opposites. Soul was extracted from donors richly endowed with it, as plants are, and infused it in solid vehicles like metals. Thereby, they started with two opposites: a delicate herb but rich in soul, and a metal, inert but heat resistant, and its future vehicle. As its future vehicle. The resultant represented soul transferred into metal. Just as soul had a cloud of earth growing into atom, herbal soul incorporated into a metal made from a ferment. Let me read that over. Just as soul made a clod of earth grow into atom, herbal soul incorporated into a metal made this a ferment, which means it could grow and increase. A calcined metal was a herbal metallic complex, but as being explained here, also a hermaphrodite by constitution and autonomous by function as a ferment. The best preparation deserved to be called ferment gold. It was perfect insofar as gold, the vehicle, is fireproof. And it is fireproof because it grows so fast that any injury due to heat is repaired at the same time. Ferment gold, however, cannot resist the high temperature at which gold melts. Ferment gold was live gold, heat resistant, but not fireproof, whereas gold as metal is fireproof. Let us here consider awards of honor. Example, bronze medal and gold medal. It is the metal that is of real importance and not the metal. Yet the judge feels justified in selecting for the best award a vehicle which is most permanent of all metals. Likewise, when the alchemist has changed the base metal, say once into silver and on another occasion into gold, he has produced, in the latter case, a superior drug. He could claim his art having reached the stage of perfection, for gold as a metal is fireproof, whereas silver is not. Extending this idea, when silver is enlivened as fermented silver and gold as ferment gold, the latter must obviously be better in every respect. To talk of live metals or calcined metals as resurrected metals representing resurrection bodies shocks modern rationalists. Such authors trying to modernize ideas based on animism and dualism have given us a distorted picture of alchemy. Inasmuch as the alchemists have suffered thereby, I have fears that my own interpretations may meet the same fate. I have therefore felt it expedient to repeat myself, though it is detrimental to style. But I have left nothing vague and defined such terms as perfection and even soul. Although I feel that the contents presented here will offer a correct picture of alchemy, above all, it will indicate that it is very much alive and panacea, called Makara Dharawa. It is available in India as the preparation of synthetic cinnabar, and cinnabar was taken orally in China as early as 200 BC and was used as a drug of resurrection about 600 BC, if not even earlier. It is assumed that the human mind loves to be entertained by legends and mythologies. Legends start popularizing new ideas in a beautiful form, After alchemy was introduced, but not yet popular, as in the days when Al-Biruni lived in India, legends existed implying gold as a live metal capable of growth and self-repair. The full impact of alchemy upon mythology remodeled God Shiva so that we can say alchemy modified Shiva before Shiva modified Rasayana, thereby creating alchemy in India. For Rasayana, as Indian alchemy, we finally come to the real alchemy in India. The former was herbal in origin, the latter mercurial, both preparing drugs of immortality. The feature which took most of my energy was to show correspondence between two opposites as co-creators, upon which theoretically alchemy is based, and the two pillars of Indian philosophy, Brahman and Atman, as the two fractions of soul as a whole. Brahman is identified as growth soul or male subsoul, and Atman as soul corporal or female subsoul. Their union means fusion of opposites, which results in creative energy capable of conferring rejuvenation, resurrection, and immortality. For it is to change and enliven a metal into ferment gold is a trivial achievement. Indian philosophy is made to explain, therefore, alchemy, since both are founded on dualism merging into monism. The conception of a ferment, dual-natured but as one, and that of a hermaphrodite, indissoluble and as one, show how dualism developed into monism. In Indian monism, Brahman incarnates itself into Atman. They are like mirror images that are not identical, just as two poles of a magnet are not. Yet one exists without the other. With such attempts, I feel I could not have gone deeper into theoretical alchemy, bringing Indian Rasayana and Indian Upanishads, each unique in nature, together as the products of the same thinker. Holding such views, I certainly do not endorse the popular view of origins of alchemy pronounced by authors like A.G. Hopkins, who writes that in the beginning alchemy was far from being philosophical. It was just an art like that of the carpenter or blacksmith. Here it is being shown that the ascetic hankering after rejuvenation founded Rasayana, which developed into alchemy, and hankering after immortality established the Upanishadic philosophy. Lust for life made the individual dream of eternal youth in the world and took him to Rasayana and alchemy. Another, who realized this as impossible and feared death, became an idealist and inspired for a place in heaven among the immortals, and the way leading to it took to the Vedanta as applied philosophy of immortality. So I'm just going to note right here that they're tying in those books into alchemy and how it all derived from the practical side of alchemy to the philosophical origins of these books, the Vedanta, Upanishads, and so forth. Okay, let's keep going. That part of the book, which is written last and yet read before the book itself, is the foreword. This is best written by one who knows the subject and also the author. It is an honor and a source of happiness for me that His Excellency, the Chancellor of Aramea University of Technology, Tehran, Iran, Professor Dr. Saeed Hossein Nazar, a renowned scholar, has kindly contributed to the foreword. I beg to dedicate I beg to dedicate the monogram to Dr. J. Needham, FRS, the world's leading authority on the history of Chinese science and technique, for kindly appreciating my past work in a way which no one has done so far. It is my pleasant duty to thank both these authorities once again here. The monogram has resulted as a labor of love. I am fortunate that it is being published by the Institute of History of Medicine and Medical Research. New Delhi, whose president, Hakim Abdul Hamid Ahmad Sahib, has also dedicated himself to advance such knowledge for its own sake. Naturally, he has placed me under a great debt of gratitude. I must also thank Mr. Jawad Mizar for his patience and perseverance in typing the manuscript. So we're at the first part. This is the beginning of the first paragraph, chapter. I would like to note here that if you take a look back in the previous video that I posted when I showed the actual table of contents, this book is being cataloged by chapters. So it's not like, not by chapters, but by paragraphs. It's not by chapters. So it's like one paragraph, two paragraph, and it goes on like that. So let's get started. We're here at the first paragraph of the Indian Alchemy of Rasayana in the light of Aceticism and Geriatrics. 1. Differential approach of a scientist and a historian. Alchemy has been a science of some sort, and it is also claims a history. Accordingly, if we approach its past, we are called upon to do justice to it, first as scientists and next as a historian. The historian seems to be mainly concerned with the events, and his anxiety is limited to their documentation. What leads to the events does not seem to interest him. Let us consider two decisive battles of the world. One at Waterloo as a crushing defeat at the French, which could properly account for the subsequent changes in the face of Europe. The other was fought in 1757 at Plassey in India, which relatively was a skirmish. And Clive, who was victorious, reported to his authorities in England that fortunately there was little loss of life on either side. Yet the battle established once for all British power in India, which continued to expand until the whole subcontinent came under its domination. No historian ever attempts to explain this miracle. In contrast to the historian of a scientist is concerned with some phenomenon, be it a social one, and as soon as he recognizes it he formulates a problem, and it is this to which he devotes his attention. He attempts to discover the mechanism of action leading to the phenomenon. Only then he feels he has done justice to his subject. Applying such two-step procedure to alchemy, we start with the statement that gold was supposed to have been synthesized. Firstly, the claim has to be confirmed, and secondly, the active principle which was powerful enough to change a base metal into gold. These two problems would be unavoidable in a proper presentation of alchemy, be it as pseudoscience. Now there is no authentic record that gold was ever made. Prima facie, there can be no history when there is no beginning. Then it would be a wonder how a bogus art could continue to persist for no less than several centuries. At least here some sort of explanation should be forthcoming. On the contrary, I count myself among those who believe that alchemy as actually started still continues to exist, living like a living fossil of culture, at least in India and Pakistan. The agencies on which alchemy depended. Paragraph 2, rather. Granting alchemy's claim to be correct, the problem further arises as to how gold was made. What were the actual substances and their active principles involved in the transformation of base metals? In Arabic, there are two such substances, kimia and elixir. Nothing corresponding exists in Greek. This sounds too bad to be true, yet such absence can be confirmed. Taylor, chapter 1, verse 66, admits that the principal feature that is lacking in Greek alchemy is that of the elixir of the philosopher's stone. Even in Indian alchemy, the word Rasayana by no means specifies no agent changing a base metal into gold. There are, however, others which would be mentioned later on. Since there can be no alchemy without such substances, we presume that the same were nevertheless known to ancient workers in the field, but we have overlooked the terms used by them. The blame would reasonably rest not with the original systems, but with historians interpreting past records. Okay, I can barely see this word because the printing is just such an old book, and the way that it was scanned in is like kind of loose. Some of the words are faded out, but I'm gonna try to get it. It says other Alchemy of the Accounts of Alchemy. If you can download this book and read along, so you can also see. Maybe you can make out the word better than me. But let's keep going. I have particularly emphasized the absence of terms in Greek corresponding to kimia and elixir, for there can be no alchemy and thus no history of alchemy without them. Even otherwise, there have been glaring omissions in the works of recognized authorities. Holmerd has composed an otherwise excellent compendium entitled Alchemy. He was independently reviewed by two reviewers. Professor S.H. Nassar writes in Isis, 1958, chapter 49, verse 451, that Holmerd's approach is basically historical rather than doctrinal, and it is through the passage of time rather than a unity of ideas that the book is organized and held together. The other critic was Professor Hukas, who could not avoid noticing that the one thing missing in the book is a clear exposition of alchemical theory. I fear this criticism applies to many treatises where we also miss the nature of the active agent responsible for transmutation of metals. Taylor's first own book, which is by no means inferior, contains not a word to explain the origin of the name alchemy, without which its beginning remains unknown. Wilson, as the reviewer, missed the omission so much as so that he tried to supply the etymology of the word as best as he could. Noticing other lacuna in the Histories of Alchemy, Hopkins 5 PV was led to remark as late as 1934 that the fundamental work of fact-finding was so time-consuming that no real history of alchemy has yet appeared. And the verdict was virtually extended to 1951 when Taylor 116 confessed that it may be at once be said that alchemy still remains an unsolved problem. Should my attitude appear hypercritical, I admit that we nevertheless know more about Greek alchemy than that of any other. In fact, we can interpret other systems best in terms of what is known of Greek alchemy. This is due to the indefatigable. This is due to the indefatigable research of European and American scholars, to whom we are all grateful. Okay. Paragraph 4, cardinal points of knowledge. To avoid any point of unwitting escaping our attention, we must formulate a criterion of proceed with it stepwise. Its conditions would be those which carry full conviction, and they are nothing else than what may be called the cardinal points of knowledge. When translated as practical questions, we would be required to know: 1. What was alchemy to begin with, and same later on? 2. How was gold synthesized, the substances employed for it, and their active principles? 3. Who founded it? And 4. Why? When we have answers to these inquiries, we would automatically learn: 5. Where alchemy began, and 6. When. These 6 aspects of the history of alchemy are no less important than the 6 sides of a cube, enabling us to perceive its solidity. Okay. Paragraph 5. The positive criterion of alchemy as a whole. We can further conceive criteria, external and internal, negative and positive, one serving as the background for the other and the foreground to appear in proper relief. For a positive criterion on a system of thought, we cannot do better than look for an actual precedence. This is offered by Dr. Ritter and Diana in their History of Greek Art. It appears that the Doric building, as a work of art, is a unique whole, whose essential parts are logically to be deducted from one another. We may compare a whole to a family. There would be children and grandchildren among themselves. They would be as cousins of different degrees. The family pedigree has to be seen vertically and horizontally to realize it as a complete whole. It seems we can define a whole as the integration. It seems we can define a whole as the integration of parts related among themselves as also to the whole. Such an integrated system, for example, is the human body of tissues and organs. As a corollary, it is part ascribed to a whole. It becomes directly and indirectly related to other parts, much as cousins do in a family. When the units multiply, parts remain mutually related and their integrations expands as a complete whole. Then the parts are assigned their positions by the intrinsic virtues, the uses they reveal not to the other parts but to the whole. It is the emphasis on the whole which permits the constituents to be further interrelated among themselves. The makeup of the whole interests science, and once it begins to exist as such, its subsequent or obvious progress becomes the concern of history. It is the evidence that no invention can be born without a preceding necessity. Discoveries by mere accidents are so rare to be ignored. In fact, even these come only to those who have been working to discover something else. Thus, reasoning logically and considering chronologically, the alchemist or the inventor must be assigned the first place and his invention or alchemy the second. The founder existed before alchemy, and the motive with which he founded it implies some necessity or urge which he alone can best reveal. But if we now look into these histories of alchemy, they treat alchemy like a foundling picked up in some workshop at Alexandria. As such, its parentage remains unknown, and as we know next to nothing of the very founder of the art. Nevertheless, if the subject is to be presented as a whole, the producer or the alchemist deserves more attention than his product or alchemy. In ignorance of its founder, no history of alchemy can be forthcoming, a fact even otherwise recognized explicitly by Hopkins and implicitly by Taylor, both already cited. Okay, so paragraph 6, times that made alchemy. It is true that men make times, but it is equally true that times make men. When they were the times which the founding members of alchemy actually had to face. This consideration takes us to the social histories of those times. In proceeding, thus we are further guided by Virchow himself, a marker of modern medical science. According to him, medicine is a social science in its very bone and marrow. And nothing better applies to alchemy, which actually started as geriatrics, though convinced as the art of rejuvenation. This is interesting. I'm going to take a moment right here so we can see that they're referring to right here that alchemy and medicine even evolved just from geriatrics first. So I guess it was the extension of life. So the elderly, I guess, coming to a point in their life where they felt as if, they were getting old. They noticed that their life vitality was depleting and whatnot. And so they were looking for ways to enhance their life vitality for the remainder of their life, but even not just so to enhance it, but also to extend their life vitality, their life expectancy, rather. So this is where medicine started to become up. They started looking for different ways, and the elixir of life. This is where all of this came from. So let's note that much. Okay, let's keep going. It says geriatrics is the real phase. Rejuvenation Geriatrics is the real phase. Rejuvenation is fabulous one, like chemistry and alchemy. Thus, a realist would find geriatrics even where a pseudoscientist claims it to be rejuvenation. It is the history of past social life that reveals how man really felt the need for rejuvenation as some sort of it. Whether he achieved it is another story, but his urge was genuine, and it made him an indefatigable seeker. Okay, an indefatigable seeker. Now much has been written on the history of medicine, taking it to its earliest stage of civilization. Yet I do not know a chapter, much less a book, on the history of geriatrics, which thus raises a secondary problem for us. While we are looking at medicine as a discovery and an invention, we are focusing attention on the social history representing the times that started medicine. This is but a phase of the same consideration which explains the evolution of species by environment forcing adaptation upon living forms. Pressure differing from species became different. Differing species became different. It means that environment makes species just as times makes men. In accounting for the birth of any new form, some necessity must be held as causal, thereby assuming the cause as emanating from the environment. Not only in biology, but even in philosophy, the same problem makes its importance felt. Thus, Professor S.H. Nassar observes that one of the most important questions of Islamic philosophy has been the conditions under which something needs a cause. And the cause which led to the invention of alchemy rests entirely with the alchemist, its inventor. And we shall see that it has his urge for rejuvenation practiced. Urge for rejuvenation. Paragraph 7. Social life created asceticism, and this in turn an urge for rejuvenation. Okay. In ancient times, life struggle was so severe that no form of social parasitism could be tolerated. To reduce the number of feeders, infanticide of girls were practiced. Women are not ideal breadwinners, and less their number, the better for the family. Likewise, widows were burnt really to save others the trouble of supporting them. Next came the sick and the aged. Whoa. Okay, I just want to make a side note right here. This is incredible. Like, that little part of the paragraph, wow. It's quite unfortunate that, these this culture found itself in such dire circumstances where they felt the need to see each other as subjects of such sort, and these practices were amongst family members. So let's keep that duly noted. Of course, this is all coming after the British and the wars. The wars and the British or French or whatever, that the European takeover of the Indian lands, as we have just already previously read a little bit back up in this recording. So let's keep going. It says, next came the sick and the aged. Here, Alberni writes that in India during most ancient times, the bodies of the dead were exposed to the air, being thrown in the fields without any covering, which is the case even today in rural parts of Tibet. Also, sick people were exposed in the fields and in the mountains and left there. It says, also sick people were exposed on the fields and in the mountains and left there. Whoa. But if they recovered, they returned to their dwellings. I have been informed of similar instances occurring in the interior of the Sindh. A temporary shed is constructed, and chronic patients are left there to their fate, to the myriad of passers-by. Okay, rarely they recover. Usually they die and are devoured by jackals. Ooh, jeez. Pegs 10 cites typically instances of inclemency meted out to the infirm old parents not necessarily sick. Such people are taken to the bank of a river and left unattended. To expedite their death, their mouths are filled with the sand by their own children and their bodies pushed into the river, thereby practicing patricide. Ooh. Thus speaks Pegs of Penko of about 1800. At Rishikesh, a place of pilgrimage close to Hardwar and near Dehradun, India, there is a bridge over the Ganges. An infirm old father would be brought in a small palki or palanquin, well garlanded and befitted in a pilgrim, and suddenly dropped into the river from over the bridge. Such cases, though rare, happen even today. We can now imagine how intolerant ancient times were towards the aged. In those days, it was incumbent on every male member of the community to hunt together, fell forest trees, and partake in tribal feuds. The aged were ill-suited for such strenuous duties and had to be eliminated. Ooh. But here arose a difference according to the climatic conditions of the land. If the aged belonged to a cold country like Germany, to exile him to a forest were to see him devoured overnight by a pack of hungry wolves. To avoid such a brutal death, there arose a custom typically of heathenism. Okay, typically of heathenism. The old man was to be beheaded by his eldest son. He died as a hero to save himself the ignominy of a parasite and his family the burden of supporting an infirm. Excuse me. For accepting martyrdom or willing death, he was promised Valhalla, the heaven of paganism. But in a warm country like China or India, he could eke out an existence like a solitary deer of a forest. He was excommunicated to live like an outcast in the forest. Thus arose asceticism as an unavoidable social curse. It is confined to the aged, the male, and to a warm country. The history of early asceticism, like that of Griatrics, has yet to be written, but I imagine it begins with civilization itself. At least when Buddha stepped out of his palace, asceticism was fully recognized to welcome him. This is admitted when Radhakr Rishman 107-97 states that retirement from the world is enjoyed for every Aryan when once his duties to society are fulfilled. This is a polite way of saying when he is superminated. I can barely see what this word, hold on one second, give me a superannuated. Applying the theoron that one essential part can be logically declared from another, we shall see how facts accumulate to expand a consistent whole. Now the conditions of life depicted above, which the aged exiled to face, created. Sorry, these words are so faded. I'm trying to make out the best of my ability. Okay, so it says, now the conditions of life depicted above, which the aged exile had to face, created an immediate need to overcome the shock of solitude. Moreover, he was to be his own grocer and cook, and had to collect foodstuffs in the form of vegetables and roots from all over the forest. He therefore needed something enough to collect his daily ration. Thus, he could not afford to neglect a single day, for it would mean fasting. Any long sick leave would bring premature death from starvation, not to talk of inviting early years some beasts of prey. Briefly, there arose two demands on the part of the old exile, immediately for an energizer, and as soon as possible for a drug recalling the robust health of his youth. To be able to remain physically fit day after day for an old man was nothing short of trying to become young again. Okay, so what we just read is basically saying that there was a practice being adhered to where the old was outcasted because they were looked at as feeble and unable to perform within the tribal spaces within the family unit to be of any service or support of addition to the overall well-being of the family. So as you got older, you were seen as something that was just merely like a burden. So you were outcasted, and if you weren't sick, you were just outcasted into the forest, having to fend for yourself. And so they're trying to say that the possibility of alchemy came from alchemy or herbalism, because the next one goes into the birth of herbalism, came from the need for the elderly to sustain itself daily so that it can collect its resources and provide for itself, essentially. So let's keep going to paragraph 8, birth of herbalism. To find the proper place for geriatrics, or rather for the art of rejuvenation as it is actually conceived, we must have a picture of medicine as a whole. We are required to briefly recapitulate the history of early medicine. Man first treated himself by prayers. Words and sounds served like invisible drugs. Thus arose healing magic. Such a psychology system of treatment starting as spiritual in nature, gradually became more and more material. With it, the development from using a common remedy became more and more specific. Then plants also came to be used externally. Mere physical contact sufficed to bring about a cure. Vegetable products could even serve as charms or amulets. This became herbal magic. The curative principle passed from herb to patient, much as heat would. A plant was something like a magnet, which by physical contact transfers its property to an inert piece of iron. Should this theory seem out of place to discuss, I beg to point out that it has survived to this day. Only when we recall such archaic ideas that we can interpret what persists as actual claims. There is a famous drug house manufacturing Eastern medicines and extols one of its preparations maintaining that the strength of the medicament passes into the system of the consumer, and what can diffuse unchanged from a plant into the human body. We know that vitamins should be able to pass as such in this way, but in ancient times, animism was the dominant system of thought. A plant, mineral, and metal, each was living entity and carried a soul. Soul could transmigrate, and the strength of medicinal plant was the quantum of soul it carried, which could be transferred into the system of the patient, thereby conferring strength and curing him. Okay, I just want to note before I finish this paragraph. Okay, so what I'm reading here is very interesting because the fact that they started out believing that plants and metals has soul. This right here is indicative in our society where the idea of AI and its technology and the computer and the robots, all of that is stemming from the idea of that it is alive. It has connotations from this passage that we just read. It has fermentations relating to the fact that metals were believed to have soul. So I believe that is like the basis for how a lot of people are referring to robots, computers, and even the AI as being alive and the next version of life, and why they're so interested in pursuing that. So that was interesting to see. But let us continue. Treatment was substitution therapy, and the active principle was soul. To take a portion of herbal juice was to add to the stock of soul to a system running short of it. Man did not proceed at first from some abstract notion, but empirically discovered the curative properties of plants and minerals. But such findings were rare and far between. Once animism offered a theory, be it ever so vague. Evergreen plants, for example, were conceived as very rich in soul content and thus more powerful than others, and a theoretical background was offered which gave rise to herbalism. Indeed, nothing is more impressive than that growth. Life best exemplified by plants. Thus, herbalism resulted from the impact of animism upon empirical knowledge of plants, making herbal soul the active principle. Alchemy started as an offshoot of such herbalism. It produced herbal metallic preparations with soul from a plant as the active principle. Okay, so we also are now, we're also seeing here that this also leads us to see how herbalism and being quote unquote vegan or vegetarian gave rise to superiority of all other diets preceding it. I could see how that rose or that kind of like developed within India and kind of spread outwardly to the rest of the world. So I find that interesting as well. But let's continue to paragraph 9, shall we? The first need of acidic for an energizer. To be able to search for foodstuffs as forests produce the acidic immediately needed as energizer. He had to cast off his depression and be on his legs to ransack the resources of the forest. The Aryan ascetic discovered the energizer as a plant, ephedra, naming its juice soma. Soma has been discussed and over-discussed, making it more mysterious than before. Since we are dealing with the history of Indian alchemy, it is but right that we first refer to the latest authority in the field, who happens to be Professor P. Ray. He writes that soma was the fermented juice from the stems of some plant not specified by him, and had been highly extolled and invoked as the representation of divine power. We can easily accept divine power as the virtue attributed to the soul rather than to any material fraction of soma. Reference to fermented juice implies the content to be alcoholic. Soma juice, then, would be an alcoholic drink. Interesting. An alcoholic drink of ephedra. I don't know if any of you who are listening, if you had any experience with the plant ephedra, but I remember, a few years back when when the diet pills had this huge crave, and they were working. Every diet pill had ephedra in it, and I remember I used to use them myself, and I remember losing a ton of weight. And it was very energizing. It was very energizing. I remember I was able to get long, enduring workouts done using diet pills that had ephedra in it. And we would always see a lot of weight reduction. We would always meet our goals using it. It was like the biggest thing until some people started having problems, so-called having problems. I don't know. I've never really seen anyone. It just started to spread as document, blog posts and news media, with their little stories or whatever, spreading about ephedra being now some unsafe excuse my language, some unsafe substance that is now being taken out of all of the diet pills. But I think they took it out just because it actually worked. I never had any problems whatsoever. I never had any adverse side effects using ephedra. I just want to note that. So yeah, make sure you get in the comments and let me know if you ever had any experience with ephedra, and if so, what was your experience with it, and what do you think about this passage that we just read as far as ephedra being the first energizer that was discovered by the elderly within the forest, and then fermented into a juice, an alcoholic juice. So let's keep going. We're still on paragraph 9. The bar discusses the same juice by its Iranian synonym, hyoma, and thereby quotes the attributes of Bacchus, as follows. The liquid drink of grapes delivers the mortals from grief and gives sleep as an oblivion of daily evils, nor is there any other medicine for troubles. Thus, alcohol was a tranquilizer and even sleep inducer. On the contrary, others, including the Aryan ascetics, found real energizers, and these were non-alcoholics. Okay, let me just note right here that we're talking about alcohol in its first form of creation, which is not to be confused with the store product that we are now consuming to be represented as alcohol beverage. So don't confuse the two. The alcohol beverages that sell in the stores today have been reformulated and are not at the same superior production as it initially was. So I just want to note that there was a different alcohol, that was a different method of fermentation applied to the process, and a different alcohol that they are referring to in this book. So let's keep going. It says, among the earlier writers who wished to know how Soma helped its Aryan users was Roth. He remarks that it is not quite clear what attributes must be assigned to the remarkable juice Soma, which for the Aryans was what wine is for other people. Wine here passes merely as an antidepressant, whereas an energizer is far more. Trying to name the plant, he could only refer to previous authors who imagined it to be Aceticism akita. Now, we just want to note here that, so wine seems to be more of a suppressant, being used as a suppressant, and the energizer drink was more of a stimulant, okay, which was the ephedra soma. Now, this herb cannot deliver a juice which can be fermented, nor is it an antidepressant in any way. Accordingly, later on, Griffith could correctly explain that the references to Soma as the god, the juice of the plant, and the moon are very numerous. The plant was formerly supposed to be a milky climbing plant, Asclepia aceta. It is now identified with the species of ephedra, which in the Harirud Valley in Baluchistan is said to bear the name Huma, and Yama. These names would be various of the Iranian word Haoma, which is a synonym of Soma. Okay, so I just want to make note that I've previously seen the reference in the alchemical text, some people referring to the deciphering of the alchemical text as moon being silver, moon being Luna, and silver, those two relating to the code for silver. But here, which dates, pretty far back, this claims that the moon is actually referring to this soma, which is this white milky substance of this white milky part of the ephedra plant. That is so interesting. Now, remember, in this book so far, this text has been stating over and over again that alchemy started by combining herbalism with metals. I believe it said it would combine the herbs and the metals, and it was one more thing I can't remember, but just refer back to my previous readings, or we'll catch it and as we continue. But I just wanted to kind of point that out. I think that's very interesting. So is some of the text being translated incorrectly? Did we just find a new piece of evidence here, or what? Well, let's keep going. The Iranians used the aspirant H for the Sanskrit sibilant S, thereby equating Haoma equals Soma. Griffith also translate a hymn from Atharva Veda praying that the many plants that Soma rules, asking it to deliver the suppliants from grief and woe, and life of the homeless, old exile was full of them. If nothing else, the food was not nourishing, which alone could cause a hungry stomach. Finally, Professor Kashikar of Pune was kind enough to inform that Sir Harold Bailey also identifies that soma plant as a mushroom. His letter is dated 24th July 1973. Had there been any mushroom as a drug of longevity, cum, and mortality, it would have certainly been mentioned in the ancient Hindu literature. We shall see later that a number of herbal Rasayana preparations have been incorporated in the Codex of Shikraka. A mushroom is conspicuous by its absence here as elsewhere. On the contrary, the Chinese do record mushrooms as conferring longevity. Smith mentions two such species, Polyporus igniarius and P. lucidius. About the latter, he writes that it grows as the roots of trees. It lasts long when dried and can be recognized as an emblem of mortality. Its Chinese name is Ling Shi, or briefly Shi. Thus, the mushroom has been mentioned in ancient Chinese literature. Had there been also one used by ancient Aryans, either Iranian or Sanskrit records would have revealed the same. Moreover, Amanita mushroom is not recognized even by Chinese Taoists. Paragraph 12. The position of the Rasayana in Indian medicine. Just as we have considered the alchemist and his urge to found alchemy, we wish to know the corresponding founder of medicine first. There can be only two sources of information on drugs, one accidentally discovered by many people and their findings gradually accumulating to form a system of medicine. The other would be the achievements of those who, for some reason, made it their business to know medicinal plants. Here, contribution to knowledge of medicine would be much greater. In the class come ascetics living the exiles in the forest, and what they needed most was a drug of rejuvenation, or at least one which could keep them strong and active enough to search for vegetable foodstuffs in the forest. They lived on hopes of discovering a remedy for the infirmity of old age. Searching for the impossible, they came to discover the properties of so many herbs, and that they unwittingly became the founders of herbalism, which was the original medicinal system both of India and China. And this is shown by the step that they have clearly left on the character, at least, of Indian medicine. Medical science is called Ayurveda. Literally, it means science of life or biology. Then, a science concerned with life must also look at the preservation of life and therefore to curing elements. Hence, Ayurveda signifies medicine. The actual drugs are called the Aceticism, a word derived from a root meaning plant, since in the beginning most medicines were herbs. As distinct from the art of treating diseases, there also existed the art of rejuvenation, the aged, and this was named Rasayana. It has been explained above that the latter was the primary concern of the ascetic, who only incidentally came to discover remedies for other diseases to which he himself must have been subjected. Social history of the times clearly makes the ascetic first a seeker of rejuvenation and next and incidentally the seeker of cures for diseases. This presumably was the state already in the Rig Vedic times. Atharva Veda, which came later as an echo of earlier times, contains hymns of two kinds clearly pointed out by Sir P.C. Ray. One is called Rasayana for curing diseases and driving away demons, which is in those days were supposed to cause ailments. The other had for its object the securing of long life and health, and is known as Ayushyana, a term which later on gave place to Rasayana, the Sanskrit equivalent of alchemy. Following him, both Professor P. Ray and Professor N.R. Dar have stated that the same, almost using his very words. Then, to believers in the spirits, just as a tyrant may enslave a depriving man of his freedom, a diabolic spirit can overpower a man when he loses his health. Thus, as far as disease were concerned, they all have an external etiology. But old age is no disease. Here, to aspire for longevity is to maintain all intrinsic assets as such. However, these are being regularly depleted, and youth departeth without promising to return. Then, therefore, is no other option than to restart life, as it were, from a scratch, to be born again, just as the serpent does when he moults regularly from year to year. Health is restored by driving away a foreign spirit, but youth is restored by repeating birth, which means repeating creation. Here, the entire constitution is the reconditioned by an all-changing agency. The earliest way of achieving longevity, implying rejuvenation, was by performing Ayushyana prayers. Now, just as there is poetic license, we can acquire an interpreter's license. Using such a prerogative, we interpret our Veda as medicine proper, as a descendant of his progenitor. The Rasayana prayers in Atharva Veda and Yashyana, the art of rejuvenation of Griatrics, as that of the Ashiana prayers. This word has been translated by Monar Williams as giving long life, but one can be justified in interpreting it as immortal life, which, however, implies a previously existing notion of external youth, which is the stage after one has accepted rejuvenation first. Instead of taking Rasayana or rejuvenator to some prayers as invisible drugs, I take it to a definitive herb, ephedra, which is soma, an energizer. Thereby, the origin of Rasayana is virtually taken to pre-Atharva Veda period, to that of Rig Veda. I believe it is even older, for we cannot overlook legends which have survived even to this day. We must know when begins the idea of rejuvenation. With whom it begins is clear by now, is the ascetic, but the asceticism seems to be a product at least of the forest civilization of India and China. Paragraph 13, prehistoric cosmogony supporting the idea of rejuvenation. We can arbitrarily divide Indian medicine into three periods: pre-Vedic, Vedic, and post-Vedic, the last being a synonym of the earliest stage of codified medicine. In the earliest cosmogony, the first element to have existed is water. Water created the universe, and it has also created life. This idea was widely spread literally from China to Peru. Rig Veda recognizes it. The Holy Quran 30:21 also states that life was created in water. When water created life, water can best preserve life. Moving water especially possess therapeutic properties. Above all, warm springs with their mysterious heat and a more mysterious terrestrial origin. Even New Testament refers to a chronic patient waiting to be cured by entering as the first into the floods of a spring. Such baths all over the world, including the one near Karachi, have a very long past. Even baptism can be traced to the spiritual healing powers of water, originally of moving water, of a brook rather than of a lake, best of a river like Ganges. Thus, such waters could rejuvenate the old, and there arose fountains or springs of eternal youth. On the contrary, there never was a lake of eternal youth with stagnant water. Next came herbs growing in deep waters, conferring rejuvenation and everlasting youth. To its later period belong preparations like amarita in Sanskrit and ambrosia in Greek. These words have a common Aryan root, implying that the Greeks and the Hindus had accepted the idea when they lived together in Central Asia, the home of the Aryan peoples before they separated themselves. Amarita and ambrosia are drugs of immortality, which is the most effective form of saying that they are also drugs of rejuvenation. I need not continue to identify these two virtues in later discussions. Then amarita and ambrosia are legendary drugs, which merely mean that we have no record of their long past, but can nevertheless be looked upon as the bygone ancestors of the Rasayana preparations. Although all through a lineal descent there has been the recurring motive of regeneration. In Vedic times, we have soma as the drug of rejuvenation cum immortality. Since Iranians profess the same veneration for soma, calling it hoyoma, its use was already pre-Vedic when Hindus and Iranians lived together. We finally come to post-Vedic period, which is assumed here to begin with Sriraka. He is to Indian medicine what Hippocrates is to that of Greece. We are now in historical times and interpretations can be documented. Okay, this is where I'm going to end off, and hopefully you guys can got something from that, and we're going to pick this up at another time. And go ahead and leave a comment on some of your observations of whatever we read within these passages, any enlightenment that you may have received. Get that mind going, and let's all figure this out. Until next time.